How do we explain the technological achievements of our ancestors? There are so many structures and artifacts that they left behind seemingly without having possessed the technology to create them, and yet we look right past them. It's almost like we don't want to know. Is it possible that they had access to higher forms of technology that have since been lost? You might start believing that after you've watched this video. How uncertain is our knowledge of ancient science and technology if even a simple piece of string can surprise us? In this instance, the surprise comes from the fact that the string was made by Neanderthals. Prior to its April 2020 discovery, we'd have said that such a thing was impossible for the Neanderthals because they lacked the dexterity and planning ability. Nevertheless, there's little doubt that they made these cord fragments from grass fibers in Aubry-du-Marais, southern France, around 50,000 years ago. Prior to their discovery, the oldest known cord fragments were a mere 19,000 years old and came from Israel. Experts think that this piece of string might even have come from a basket or net. If the Neanderthals could make string, there's nothing to say that they could have made bags, baskets, or anything else we'd previously have ruled out. The idea that Neanderthals were significantly intellectually inferior to us is slowly being disproven. So what else might we have gotten wrong about our closest evolutionary cousins? Our next artifact has several names, but precisely zero credible explanations of its origin or purpose. It's the Disc of Sabu, also sometimes known as the schist disc or the Saqqara disc. The latter name is a clue that it was discovered in Saqqara, Egypt. The best guess of archaeologists is that the 5,000-year-old artifact is a highly elaborate candlestick holder. If that's the case, it's the only one of its kind we've ever found. The fact that it's obsidian suggests there's more to it than a simple candlestick holder. Obsidian is a notoriously difficult material to work with, and nobody would go to the trouble of making a candlestick holder out of it back then when other materials were available. Even the fact that it's shaped like a wheel is a puzzle, because, as far as we're aware, the Egyptians were yet to discover the wheel 5,000 years ago. Conspiracy theorists on the internet will try to tell you that this is the steering wheel of an alien spaceship. We're not about to believe that, but the candlestick explanation is wholly unsatisfying. While we're talking about Egyptian discoveries, here's another question. Did the civilization somehow possess knowledge of electricity? It's a bold claim, but it's not the first time people have wondered whether the Egyptians had advanced technology at their disposal. When Colonel Howard Weiss blasted a hole in the Great Pyramid of Giza in 1837, he found an iron sheet between the inner blocks. That ought to have been impossible, because the Iron Age didn't begin until 2,000 years after the pyramid was built and sealed. When a metallurgical analysis of the sheet was carried out in 1989, traces of gold were found on the surface. The strong implication was that the sheet was gold-plated, but gold plating ought to necessitate knowledge of electricity. Engraved on the walls of the Hathor Temple at Dendera is a series of stone reliefs that appears to show Egyptians with giant light bulbs. Then there are the hieroglyphs in the Temple of Seti I that appear to show helicopters, planes, and cars. What had the Egyptians seen that inspired them to carve these things? How did gold plating get onto that iron sheet? How did the iron sheet even exist in the first place? So many unanswered questions. Here's a mysterious sculpture that's become a mystery hidden in plain sight. It's called the Christ Child, and it probably comes from Sri Lanka or Portuguese India. Experts tell us that when it was complete, the statue would also have featured a golden crown and probably stood on a pedestal. The fact it's called the Christ Child reflects the introduction of Christian imagery to Portuguese colonies by Christian missionaries, but its features are more aligned to those seen in statues or devotional images of the Buddha. Still, there's no doubt that this rock crystal statue is a religious icon, And no doubt that it's a stunning artifact made by a master craftsperson. The only question left to resolve is how it was created, because we're told that this artifact comes from the 16th century. Just about every tool that you'd consider using to try to replicate this work today didn't exist back then. This is an impossibly difficult material to work with unless you have machinery to assist you. And yet we have a perfectly polished, sculpted figure with no signs of cracks or marks from the manufacturing process. Archaeologists don't even have a good guess this time. Since we've touched on India, let's talk about the country's many colorful ancient myths and legends. One of those legends says that Buddha's relics were guarded by robots. That probably isn't true. But where does the legend come from? And how did the people who came up with it even know what a robot was? The answer might lay with Homer, who explored and wrote about the idea of automatons a full 2,500 years ago. The Egyptians are known to have had robot-like machines 2,300 years ago. The Chinese are also known to have had automatons at about the same time. So could King Ajatasattu have had some at his disposal when he was entrusted with defending the Buddha's remains after he died around 2,400 years ago? We know he hid the remains underground, close to Pataliputra, and built statues to watch over them. But might the statues have been capable of movement as the legends claim them to be? We don't know where the chamber is, so as unlikely as the tale might be, we can't rule it out. If the Egyptians, Greeks, and Chinese had robots, there's no reason why India couldn't have had them too. We're staying in India for a moment because we want to check out Agrasen Ki Baoli. Looking at this architectural wonder, it would be easy to believe it's a grand palace or a building of splendid ceremonial purpose. It's neither of those things. In fact, this is a stepwell. It's hidden right in the middle of New Delhi, with the modern world thriving all around it. 500 years ago, this incredibly elaborate stepwell was the city's best means of keeping an eye on the water level, gaining access to groundwater, and predicting droughts before they happened. There were once hundreds of stepwells in New Delhi alone, but this one is fortunate in that its maintenance is paid for by the national government. It became obsolete as soon as the water pump was invented, but it's still popular as a tourist destination, but locals insist that it's haunted. It's certainly true that the slightest of sounds made at the bottom has a habit of echoing, but we can't say we agree with the idea that shadows follow you as you walk around the lower levels. In the year 350 BCE, Greek inventor Aeneas had suffered enough with the shortcomings of smoke and torchlight signals as a means of communication across long distances. To solve the problem, he designed and built the world's first hydraulic telegraph, a communications system capable of transmitting information across long distances. Rather than using string, he used water. His method involved literal messages in bottles, vessels full of rods that contained coded messages understood by both the sender and the recipient. Each would have an identical vessel full of water, and pre-agreed messages would be written on the rods inside the vessels. The two parties would then signal each other by torchlight and pull the plugs out of the vessels. When the water level dropped to reveal the intended message, they'd signal with the torches again and plug the bottles back up, leaving the recipient with the desired message. It seems primitive now, but this put the Greek military light years ahead of its enemies 2,300 years ago. In fact, it was such a huge leap forward that we wonder how Aeneas came up with such a unique system when nobody else had any handle on the problem whatsoever. In 2003, a so-called ghost ship was discovered by accident in the Baltic Sea. The ship that found it didn't have time or the right technology aboard to fully investigate it, so nobody came back to take a proper look at it until 2010. Despite that thorough investigation, and another one that followed in 2016, we still have no idea what this ship was called or whose flag it sailed under. It's still known only as the ghost ship. Due to the low salinity of the water, the vessel is extremely well preserved. It's about 85 feet long and 25 feet wide, and made of wood that comes from the 17th century. Based on its design, it was probably a merchant vessel, and if experts had to guess, they'd say it might be a fluit, a type of vessel that was used by the Dutch at the time. That doesn't mean it sailed under the Dutch flag, though, because the Dutch sometimes built the ships to order for other nations. Knowing how big the ship is and possibly where it came from would be enough to identify it in some parts of the world, but it's suspected that there are around 100,000 unidentified shipwrecks in the Baltic Sea. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Many people view pigeons as a nuisance, but would you feel differently about an artificial pigeon powered by steam? You would at least rest assured that it wasn't about to use you as a toilet. As hard as this might be to believe, the steam-powered pigeon was designed 2,300 years ago in Tarentum, Magna Graecia, which is now in southern Italy. Its inventor was Archimedes, a noted inventor of his era who was also a noted military strategist, astronomer, mathematician, and politician. As his steam pigeon was self-propelled, you could say that he's the true inventor of powered flight. Achieving flight isn't what Archimedes had in mind when he invented his wooden device, though. He saw it as a way of studying birds more closely. His design is simple yet effective. An opening at the back of the pigeon leads to its internal bladder, which in turn is connected to an airtight boiler. As the boiler generates steam, the pressure eventually overcame the resistance of the connection, and the pigeon shot off into the air. An average flight covered around 3,800 feet. As well as being the first flying device, you could add Archimedes' pigeon to the list of robots that were around 2,300 years ago. We've already seen one well that looks more like a cathedral. Now here's another staggeringly beautiful well, a near miracle of 16th century architecture and design. This is Pozzo di San Patrizio in Orvieto, Italy. As if these photos inside it weren't dramatic enough, the whole thing is right on the edge of a cliff. The well was built during the early 1500s by order of Pope Clement VIII. He was hiding out in the city at the time as Rome was under attack, and he knew that Orvieto would quickly run out of water in the event of a siege. His solution was this 170-foot deep well, complete with 70 windows and dual staircases specifically designed to ensure that pack animals could run up and down the well without colliding. It was a monumental task and took a full decade to complete, by which point Pope Clement was dead anyway. Despite its staggering beauty and the fact that it functions perfectly as a well, it was declared obsolete from the moment it was finished, and it's barely been used. The upside of that is that it's still in excellent condition. Very few experts can agree on what the Crocodile stone of Champasak, Laos actually is or was designed to be. Some experts don't think it was ever shaped by human hands at all. That seems unlikely, though, as the stone is within the grounds of the ancient Wat Phu temple and didn't get there by accident. The nickname comes from the fact that the impressions on its surface are said to resemble a crocodile, but you could just as easily look at it and see the silhouette of a human being. We know the temple was built during the 12th century, but the stone itself has been here since at least the 5th. This part of the world was controlled by the Chenla Empire back then, and they were known practitioners of human sacrifice. That's why some people believe that human sacrifices were actually carried out in the stone, although there's no direct evidence to support the hypothesis. A more innocent explanation might be that the grooves in the stone were carved to collect rainwater and provide people in the temple with something to drink, although there are far more efficient ways to go about such a task. The mystery persists. Archimedes is credited with a number of the most incredible inventions of the ancient world, including the Archimedes screw. while he deserves acclaim and credit for most of his inventions, he had nothing to do with the Archimedes screw whatsoever. It's been mistakenly associated with him, but all he did was write about an invention that he saw in action when he visited Egypt in the year 234 BCE. He was told by Egyptians that the invention had already existed for some time by then, and that the secret of who came up with the idea had been lost to time. Whoever invented it, it's a remarkable feat of engineering. It's the first water displacement pump in world history and has been used to pump water from the Nile River. There's even a suggestion that an Archimedes screw was the centerpiece of the irrigation system that fed the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. A possible reference to the existence of such a screw has been identified in an inscription associated with King Sennacherib of Assyria, who lived 500 years before Archimedes was born. How have we forgotten the name of such an important inventor? One who came up with a concept that's still used all over the world today. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!